Prepare for an objective journey into the heart of the legal process. The footage you are about to see remains completely unfiltered and unedited. It is a raw, first-hand account from the front lines of justice, delivered with utmost professionalism and integrity.
I'm going to need you to step over here. You've been moving through this area in a way that's making people uncomfortable.
I'm a senior federal investigator with the Department of Homeland Security. I left my passport at the coffee kiosk. That is all.
Sir, anybody can get a card printed. That doesn't mean anything to me right now.
I want that noted. You looked at my federal identification and told me anyone...
Step back against the...
Warren Fitch didn't see a federal investigator standing in Terminal B. He saw a problem he could solve. He cornered the man, accused him of casing travelers, and threatened to have him removed from the airport in handcuffs. What Warren Fitch didn't know was that the man he was humiliating had spent 19 years building cases that put dirty cops exactly like him behind bars. And today was about to be the last day of his career. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe that a badge should never be used as a weapon against the very people it was sworn to protect, hit that like button and subscribe to Bodycam Revealed. We don't let these stories disappear. Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport doesn't sleep. Not at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning. Not when 200 flights are already in motion before most people have finished their first cup of coffee. DFW is the fourth busiest airport in the world, processing over 73 million passengers a year through its 5 terminals, its sprawling concourses, and its maze of security checkpoints that stretch across nearly 27 square miles of North Texas land. Terminal B, specifically, sits on the north side of the complex, serviced by American Airlines and a rotating cast of regional carriers. It smells like recycled air, fast food grease, and the particular anxiety of people who are already running late. The corridors are wide, the ceilings high, and the morning light cuts through the tall glass panels along the western wall in long, pale slabs that fall across the terrazzo floor like something out of a painting nobody asked for. It was in that light, near the junction of gates B15 and B17, just past the Hudson News and the Auntie Anne's pretzel stand that's been in the same spot since 2009, that Reeves Colton first noticed his passport was gone. Reeves Colton was 44 years old, and he carried himself the way men do when they've spent 2 decades in rooms where everything depended on staying calm. He was 6 feet even, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped hair that had started going silver at the temples sometime around his 40th birthday. He wore a charcoal gray travel blazer over a white dress shirt, dark slacks, and a pair of black Oxford shoes that had seen more federal buildings than most lawyers. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and within 10 minutes know exactly who in that room was hiding something. That was, more or less, his job. Reeves was a senior federal investigator with the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, a division most people had never heard of and wouldn't understand if you explained it to them. His unit handled internal misconduct, cross-agency fraud, and high-level corruption cases that were too sensitive for standard law enforcement channels. In 19 years, he had worked cases in 11 states, testified before 2 congressional subcommittees, and been quietly credited with dismantling a procurement fraud ring inside a federal contractor that had been bleeding taxpayer money for the better part of a decade. He did not talk about his work at dinner parties. He barely talked about it to his family. He had learned early that the value of what he did lived entirely in its invisibility. This morning, he and his colleague Joel Ferreira were traveling to Washington, D.C. on active assignment, a case that had been building for the better part of 6 months and was finally reaching a stage that required their physical presence at a briefing at the J. Edgar Hoover building. Their 8:20 American Airlines flight to Reagan National was boarding in 38 minutes. They had cleared security. They had time. So Reeves did what any reasonable person does with 38 minutes to spare in an airport. He went and got coffee. The spot was called Lone Star Grounds, a regional coffee kiosk wedged between Gate B14 and the far wall. The kind of place that had 4 items on the menu and made all of them well. He'd ordered a black coffee, set his carry-on bag down against the counter, unzipped the front pocket to check his boarding pass, and made small talk with the barista. A young woman named Destiny, according to her name tag, who had the practiced efficiency of someone working her third hour of a 6-hour shift. He paid, picked up his cup, and walked back toward the gate. It was only when he reached into his interior blazer pocket. A habit, a reflex, the same motion he made 30 times a day, that his fingers found nothing. He stopped walking. He checked the pocket again, slower this time. Then the other interior pocket. Then the outer pockets of his blazer. Then the front pockets of his slacks. He set his coffee down on the edge of a vacant seat, unzipped his carry-on fully, and went through it methodically. Laptop sleeve, document folder, toiletry bag, a folded copy of a case brief he wasn't supposed to have outside a secure facility. Everything was there. His federal credentials were clipped inside the document folder where they always were. His boarding pass was in his blazer pocket, right side. His passport was not anywhere. He thought back. He had definitely had it at the security checkpoint. The TSA officer at the ID verification podium had held it for a full 10 seconds, turning it over before handing it back. Had he put it in his bag? In his pocket? He tried to reconstruct the sequence. Security, shoes back on, bag off the belt, walk to Terminal B, stop at Lone Star Grounds, set bag down. Unzip front pocket. The front pocket. He had unzipped the front pocket of his carry-on to check his boarding pass. He could see the motion in his mind now. The passport had likely slipped out when he'd pulled the boarding pass free, or he'd set it on the counter without registering it. Either way, it was probably sitting on the counter at Lone Star Grounds right now, 12 feet from a woman named Destiny who hadn't noticed it yet. He picked up his coffee, re-zipped his bag, and turned back toward the kiosk with the calm, deliberate pace of a man solving a minor problem. He checked his watch. 7:44 a.m. 36 minutes to boarding. Plenty of time. Warren Fitch had been the deputy security supervisor for DFW's Terminal B since 2019. And in that time, he had developed what he privately considered an instinct for reading people. He was 51, with a gray mustache and the particular posture of a man who had spent years in a uniform and never quite let go of what it felt like. He walked the terminal floor every morning between 7:30 and 9, the peak of the early departure rush, and he had a habit. One that several of his subordinates had noticed and none of them had said anything about. Of lingering near the gate areas, watching. Not watching for everyone, watching for certain people. He had spotted Reeves Colton approximately 4 minutes earlier, when Reeves had been standing near his carry-on with his hands moving through his pockets. From Fitch's position near the Gate B16 corridor entrance, what he saw was a well-dressed black man standing alone, searching his clothing, pausing, looking around. He watched him open his bag. He watched him set down his coffee. He watched him go through the bag slowly and carefully. Fitch didn't reach for his radio. He didn't approach immediately. He watched for another 90 seconds, long enough to observe, he would later claim, a pattern of behavior that struck him as inconsistent with normal traveler activity. What he did not consider, or did not allow himself to consider, was that a man quietly searching his own belongings in an airport is one of the most ordinary things a human being can do. By the time Reeves had re-zipped his bag and turned back toward the coffee kiosk, Fitch was already moving. He came from the left, cutting an angle that put him between Reeves and the direction he was walking. Not aggressive, not yet, but deliberate enough that Reeves had to stop or walk into him. Reeves stopped. "Excuse me?" Fitch's voice was flat and official. He didn't smile. "I'm gonna need you to stay right here for a second." Reeves looked at him, took him in. The uniform, the posture, the way he'd positioned himself. "I'm sorry," Reeves said, his voice even. "I've been observing you for the last several minutes," Fitch said, "and your behavior is drawing concern. You've been moving through this area, going through your belongings repeatedly, watching other travelers." "I'm looking for my passport," Reeves said simply. "I think I left it at the coffee kiosk." Fitch's expression didn't change. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to step over here with me." "I have a flight that boards in 35 minutes, Reeves said. He kept his voice low, measured. "My passport is at the kiosk. I just need to..." "Sir?" The word landed like a door closing. I'm not asking. Reeves Colton looked at Warren Fitch for a long moment. Around them, the morning rush of Terminal B continued its indifferent flow. Rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, the soft collision of 100 private itineraries. A woman with 2 children glanced over. A man in a business suit slowed his walk without stopping it. Reeves took a breath, set his coffee down on the nearest seat again, and he waited. Because he had been in enough rooms with enough Warren Fitches to know exactly how this was going to go before it went there. Warren Fitch was not the kind of man who changed his mind once it was made up. That was clear from the moment he planted himself in front of Reeves Colton and decided, without a single piece of evidence, that this man was a problem. He hadn't asked a reasonable question. He hadn't listened to a reasonable answer. He had simply decided, the way some people do. And now he was going to see it through. "Step over here," Fitch said again, gesturing toward a narrow corridor alcove just off the main terminal floor, beside a maintenance door marked B Corridor Staff Only. It was away from the main foot traffic, away from the open space where people could see clearly what was happening. Reeves didn't move immediately, not out of defiance, out of awareness. He had been trained to notice exactly this kind of thing. The deliberate repositioning, the removal from public sight. He knew what it meant, and he knew that complying fully and immediately without saying a word was not always the safest choice a black man could make in a situation like this one. "I'd prefer to stay here," Reeves said calmly. In the open. Something shifted in Fitch's face. Not anger exactly. More like the mild offense of a man who was not used to being met with anything other than immediate compliance. He took one step closer and lowered his voice in the way people do when they want to sound in control, but are starting to feel like they aren't. "Sir, I'm telling you right now, if you don't cooperate, I will have you removed from this terminal. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" "I understand what you're saying," Reeves replied. "I'm also telling you clearly that I'm a federal employee. I'm traveling on assignment, and my passport is at the coffee kiosk behind me. That is all that is happening here." Fitch looked at him for a moment. Then he said something that Reeves would later recount word for word in his official statement. "Federal employee or not, you were moving through this gate area in a way that was making other travelers uncomfortable. I have a responsibility to act on that." There it was. Not a question, not an investigation. A conclusion he had already reached before he ever opened his mouth. By this point, 2 of Fitch's subordinates had appeared. Officers Delia Crane and Marcus Poole, both in full Terminal B security uniforms, both having responded to a brief radio call Fitch had made while approaching Reeves. They positioned themselves without being asked, one on each side, close enough to matter, but not so close as to look immediately aggressive to the people walking past. It was a practiced formation. They had done this before. A small number of travelers had begun to slow down. Not a crowd, just the natural human response to seeing 3 uniformed officers surrounding one man near a gate. A teenager with headphones around his neck stopped near the pretzel stand and watched openly. An older couple paused by the gate seating and exchanged a look. A woman filming on her phone kept walking but angled the lens backward as she passed. Reeves saw all of it. He kept his hands visible, his voice steady, and his eyes on Fitch. "I would like to retrieve my passport from the kiosk," he said. "I will show you my federal credentials right now if that helps move this forward." "Your credentials can be verified here," Fitch said. "You're not going anywhere until I'm satisfied with what's going on." Reeves reached slowly into his document folder and produced his DHS Office of Inspector General credential card. A laminated federal ID with his photo, his name, his agency, and his grade level printed clearly on the front. He held it out. Fitch looked at it. Not for long. Maybe 3 seconds. And then he said, "Anyone can get a card printed." The words landed in the air between them like something that couldn't be taken back. Reeves didn't raise his voice. He didn't react the way Fitch may have expected or perhaps wanted him to. He simply lowered his hand, put the credential back in his folder, and said quietly, "I want that noted. You looked at my federal identification and told me anyone can get a card printed." Fitch's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm doing my job." "No," Reeves said, "you're not." That was when Fitch made the decision to formally detain him. He didn't use that word. He said Reeves was being held for questioning pending a behavioral assessment, which is a phrase that has no formal standing in TSA or airport security protocol, but sounds official enough that most people don't push back on it. Reeves knew it had no standing. He said so. Fitch told him he could explain that to the supervisor on duty, which by rank was Fitch himself. Officer Crane produced a set of zip ties, and Reeves looked at them and then looked at Fitch and said very clearly, "I am a senior federal investigator with the Department of Homeland Security. I am asking you for the last time to verify my credentials through your dispatch before this goes any further." Fitch nodded at Crane. She reached for Reeves' wrist. He didn't resist. He stood completely still and let it happen, because he understood something that Warren Fitch had not yet figured out. That every second of this interaction was building toward a moment of reckoning, and the most powerful thing he could do right now was stay exactly who he was. Calm, documented, unbroken. The zip tie went on his right wrist loosely, and they walked him to a small security holding room at the back of the B corridor. A beige room with 2 plastic chairs, a wall-mounted camera, and a folding table. The door stayed open. Reeves sat down, set his carry-on at his feet, and folded his hands in his lap. "I need someone to contact the kiosk," he said. "My passport is there." Nobody went to check. Fitch stood in the doorway and told him that airport police had been notified and would be arriving shortly to assist with the situation. He said it like it was a courtesy. Reeves said nothing back. He looked at the wall camera in the corner of the room and then looked back at his hands. Outside the holding room, the terminal had continued doing what terminals do. Moving, announcing, boarding, rushing. But the small cluster of people who had witnessed the interaction near Gate B15 hadn't fully dispersed. The teenager with the headphones was still there. The woman who had filmed while walking had stopped further down the corridor and was looking back. 2 men in suits near Gate B17 were talking quietly to each other and glancing toward the corridor where Reeves had been taken. Nobody in an official capacity had gone to the coffee kiosk. Nobody had run a verification call through federal dispatch. Nobody had done the one simple thing that would have resolved every part of this situation in under 4 minutes. And Warren Fitch, standing just outside that open door with his arms crossed and his radio on his hip, looked for all the world like a man who believed he had handled something correctly. When in truth, he had just made the single worst professional decision of his entire career. 31 minutes later, Reeves Colton's flight to Reagan National departed without him. He sat in that beige room, hands folded, passport sitting on a counter at Lone Star Grounds 12 feet from where this all began. And he waited. Because he knew what was coming. He had seen it before, from the other side of a case file. He knew exactly how the next chapter of Warren Fitch's life was about to begin. Joel Ferreira was 38 years old and had worked alongside Reeves Colton for 6 of those years. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much in meetings, but always said the thing that mattered when it counted. He was mixed Puerto Rican and Portuguese, medium build, with dark eyes and the particular patience of someone who had spent years doing investigative work in environments where rushing got people hurt. He and Reeves had a rhythm. The kind that only comes from years of working cases together in close quarters, reading each other without needing to speak. When Reeves hadn't returned from the coffee kiosk after 12 minutes, Joel didn't panic. He sent a text. When the text went unanswered for 4 more minutes, he stood up, picked up his bag, and went to find him. He didn't have to look long. A traveler near Gate B15, the same teenager who had been standing by the pretzel stand, pointed without being asked, nodding toward the B corridor. Joel followed the direction, turned the corner, and stopped when he saw the open door of the holding room and Reeves sitting inside it with a zip tie on his wrist and 3 security personnel stationed around the entrance like they'd caught someone dangerous. Joel looked at the scene for exactly 2 seconds. Then he walked straight to Warren Fitch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stepped in front of Fitch, looked him directly in the eye, and held up his own DHS credentials, badge, and photo ID, pressed together in one hand. close enough that Fitch couldn't pretend he hadn't seen them clearly. "Joel Ferreira, Department of Homeland Security, Office of Inspector General," he said. "The man in that room is Senior Investigator Reeves Colton. We are traveling together on active federal assignment. I need you to remove that restraint right now." The corridor went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Fitch looked at the credentials. Then he looked at Joel. Then he looked back at the holding room where Reeves was sitting, still calm, still composed, watching from his chair like a man who had already written the ending to this story and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Something moved across Fitch's face in that moment. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't even full recognition yet. It was the first cold touch of understanding, the kind that starts in the stomach before it reaches the brain. That something had gone very wrong and that he was standing at the center of it. "I was conducting a behavioral assessment based on observed," he started. "Take the restraint off," Joel said. He didn't say it louder. He didn't need to. The zip tie came off 30 seconds later. Officer Crane cut it without making eye contact with Reeves, and when it fell away, Reeves rubbed his wrist once, stood up, picked up his carry-on, and walked out of that room without a single word to anyone inside it. He stepped into the corridor, looked at Joel, and gave him a small nod. The kind that meant, "I'm fine and we'll talk about this later." Joel nodded back. Then he turned to Fitch and told him clearly that a formal report would be filed before the end of the business day, and that Fitch should not attempt to contact either of them directly. Fitch opened his mouth. Joel was already walking away. Airport dispatch received the federal verification call at 8:31 a.m. 12 minutes after Joel had made contact with Fitch, and nearly 40 minutes after Reeves had first been stopped near Gate B-15. The verification came back in under 90 seconds. Senior Investigator Reeves Colton, Department of Homeland Security, OIG Division. Active credentials, currently traveling on authorized federal assignment. The dispatch operator noted later that it was one of the faster verifications she had processed that month. It had simply never been requested. At 8:34 a.m., a gate agent from the Lone Star Grounds kiosk approached the Terminal B security desk and turned in a passport she had found on the counter nearly an hour earlier. She had placed it in a lost and found sleeve and was waiting for her shift supervisor to log it. The name on the passport was Reeves Colton. The kiosk was 11 steps from where he had been detained. The passport had been there the entire time. When Fitch was informed of this, he said nothing for a long moment. One of his subordinates later told investigators that he simply looked down at the floor and stayed that way for several seconds, like a man doing private math and not liking the answer. By 9:15 a.m., 3 separate travelers had submitted footage to DFW's passenger services line. One was the woman who had filmed while walking. One was a man seated near Gate B-17 who had recorded the moment Joel Ferreira confronted Fitch in the corridor. The third was the teenager by the pretzel stand who had recorded nearly the entire sequence on his phone from the moment the zip tie was applied. His footage was the clearest. It showed Fitch dismissing the federal credentials. It showed Crane applying the restraint. It showed Reeves Colton sitting alone in a holding room. Flight missed, passport across the hall, having done nothing wrong from the first second to the last. By noon, the footage was no longer just with passenger services. Reeves and Joel were rebooked on a 1:40 p.m. flight to Reagan National. While they waited at the gate, Reeves took out his phone and began writing his incident report with the same precision he brought to every case he had ever worked. He documented the time of the initial stop, Fitch's exact words about the federal credentials, the application of the restraint, the failure to verify, the missed flight, and the location of his passport at the time of detainment. He wrote it the way he had been trained. Without emotion, without editorializing, without a single unnecessary word. He had built cases that ended careers before. He had just never been the subject of one. He finished the report, reviewed it once, and sent it at 12:47 p.m. to his supervising director, the DHS Office of Civil Rights, and the DFW Airport Authority's Internal Affairs Division. He CC'd the agency's legal counsel and added a single line at the bottom of the email that read, Bodycam and passenger footage available upon request. Then he put his phone in his pocket, picked up his coffee, and looked out the window at the tarmac. Warren Fitch had looked at a federal investigator's credentials and said anyone could get a card printed. He had applied a restraint to a man who had done nothing but lose his passport. He had let that man sit in a holding room for the better part of an hour, while the passport collected dust on a counter 12 steps away. And he had done all of it on camera. The footage hit the internet the way these things always do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one worse than the last. The teenager's video went up first, posted to his social media account sometime around 11 a.m., with no caption other than a single word. Wow. By 3 p.m. it had been shared 40,000 times. By 8 p.m. that number had tripled. By the following morning, it had been picked up by 3 national news outlets, 2 of which led their morning segments with it. The clip that did the most damage wasn't the restraint being applied. It was the 6 seconds where Warren Fitch looked directly at Reeves Colton's federal credentials and said anyone can get a card printed. That 6 seconds played on a loop across every major platform for the better part of 72 hours. People who had never heard of DFW Terminal B or the DHS Office of Inspector General watched it and understood immediately what they were seeing. A man with a badge deciding that another man's proof meant nothing, because he had already made up his mind before the proof was ever offered. DFW Airport Authority released a statement by 6 p.m. on the day of the incident. It was carefully worded, the way institutional statements always are when the people writing them are aware that lawyers are reading over their shoulders. It acknowledged that an incident had occurred in Terminal B, that passenger footage had been reviewed, and that the matter had been referred to Internal Affairs for a full investigation. It expressed that the airport was committed to ensuring all travelers were treated with dignity and respect. It did not mention Warren Fitch by name. It did not mention Reeves Colton by name. It said very little in a great many words. It satisfied no one. Warren Fitch was placed on administrative leave with pay at 9 a.m. the following morning. The notification was delivered by the Terminal B operations director in a meeting that lasted less than 10 minutes. Fitch reportedly said little during the meeting. He was asked to surrender his access credentials and radio, told that he was not to report to the terminal during the investigation period, and informed that the agency's legal team would be in contact. He left the airport through a staff exit and did not speak to the press waiting near the main entrance, though several of them called his name as he passed. His suspension was made public by noon. By 2 p.m., his name was the top trending search in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area. The investigation that followed was not a quiet one. The DHS Office of Inspector General, Reeves Colton's own agency, submitted a formal complaint to the DFW Airport Authority, the TSA's Office of Civil Rights, and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division within 48 hours of the incident. The complaint was detailed, sourced, and accompanied by Reeves' incident report, the verified dispatch record showing that no federal verification call had been made during the 40-minute detainment, the time-stamped passenger footage from 3 separate sources, and the lost and found log showing the passport had been recovered from Lone Star grounds at 8:34 a.m., before the detainment had even officially ended. It was, by any measure, an airtight file, the kind Reeves had spent 19 years building against other people. Federal investigators, not from Reeves' division to avoid any conflict, were assigned to review the broader pattern of Fitch's conduct in Terminal B. What they found during that review was not surprising to the officers who had worked under him, but it was damaging in the way that documented patterns always are. There were 3 prior complaints filed against Fitch in the previous 2 years, all involving blackmail travelers, all resolved internally with no formal action taken. One had been filed by a businessman from Houston who said Fitch had detained him near Gate B12 for 25 minutes after flagging his behavior as suspicious. Another came from a college student traveling home for the holidays who said Fitch had followed him through the terminal for nearly 10 minutes before approaching him without cause. Both men had been told their complaints had been reviewed and that no policy violations were found. Both complaints were now being looked at again with very different eyes. The pattern was no longer a complaint, it was a record. Officer Delia Crane, who had applied the zip tie restraint, was placed under a separate review, She cooperated fully with investigators and provided a written account of the incident that corroborated Reeves's report on every material point. Her cooperation was noted. Her case was handled differently from Fitch's, though it was not without consequence. Officer Marcus Poole requested a transfer to Terminal E within a week of the investigation opening. The request was granted. The DFW Airport Authority announced a mandatory retraining program for all terminal security supervisors 8 days after the incident. The program included updated protocols for interactions with federal employees, clear guidelines on the use of physical restraints during detainment, and a revised complaint review process that removed the ability of supervising officers to resolve complaints that named themselves. Civil rights attorneys who had been watching the case publicly described the reforms as a starting point, not a finish line. Reeves Colton completed his assignment in Washington, D.C. He returned to Dallas 4 days after the incident, collected his formal statement from the agency's legal team, and went back to work. He did not give interviews. He did not post anything on social media. When a colleague asked him how he was doing, he said he was fine and asked about the status of a case they had been working before the trip. He was not fine in the way that people mean when they say it without thinking. But he was the kind of man who understood that what happened to him was not an interruption of his life. It was a continuation of something much older and much larger than one morning in Terminal B. He had seen it in case files. He had heard it in testimony. He had read it in complaint reports that sat unresolved in filing systems for years until someone with enough rank made enough noise. Now he had lived it himself. And the report he had written on his phone at Gate B22, precise, sourced, and sent before his coffee went cold, was already doing what it was built to do. Some things only change when the right person refuses to let them disappear. If this story made you feel something, share it. These are the moments that get buried when nobody talks about them. Hit the like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to Bodycam Revealed. Every story we tell is a story that deserves to be heard. We'll see you in the next one.
In our unwavering pursuit of the truth, accountability is our highest priority. We challenge those in power by presenting undeniable facts, because the records never lie. Thank you for watching and trusting our investigations.